Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and in this video we are doing a sew along for the Cashmerette club pattern of the month, which is the Loring Dress. Just a little bit about the Loring. It is a really easy slip over the head type of dress that can be made with or without a whole host of ruffles. So I will be doing in this sew along all the ruffles to give you instruction on how to do all the ruffles, but you can make the neckline ruffle, you can omit the neckline ruffle, you can do the sleeves, the cute little puff sleeves with the little ruffle, or you can make it sleeveless. And then you also have the option of adding a ruffle at the bottom of the skirt to create a midi length, basically the cottage core dress of your dreams, or you can omit that ruffle and end up with a dress that's just right above the knee. So kind of sky's the limit on what you want to do with this pattern. Again, I will be showing you from start to finish how to do this dress with all of the ruffles so that you can pick and choose. And as a side note, I do have all of the steps outlined and time-stamped in the description box below. So if you'd like to skip around and hit a few different depending on the option you're making, if you want to skip a ruffle, I've got timestamps down there so you can easily find where you need to be in the pattern. All right, before we go to the cutting table to take a look at our pieces, let's talk a little bit about the fabric. The pattern calls for a light to medium weight fabric with a little bit of structure, such as, you know, like a cotton lawn, a cotton poplin, a linen. You could do a little bit of fabric with a little bit more drape, such as a rayon, but just know if you do that and you want to do one of the ruffled versions, those ruffles aren't going to be quite as dynamic as they would be in a stiffer cotton or a stiffer, more bodied fabric, such as a cotton. The same with the fullness of the skirt. It won't seem as full if you use a drapier fabric. So just be aware of those things when you are picking out your fabric for your project. I will be using a linen rayon blend that I grabbed from Joann's. So that is the fabric you will be seeing in this tutorial. Also, just as a note, I am going to be sewing on my Bernina 790 Pro. This is a loaner machine to me from the University of Sewing, a fantastic home sewing machine, really fantastic. I'll be using Gutermann Mara 100 thread in a contrasting color. Obviously, if you're making this yourself, you want to use a color that coordinates with your fabric, but I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing, so I am using a contrasting color. I'm also, you'll see me using my Kai scissors, the 6-inch blade, I believe, tailor's points basically, for all of my trimming that I need to do. These are a fantastic pair of scissors. And finally, my Oliso M3 little bitty iron, this little bitty guy, which is really great for having right by my sewing machine, just for those little pressing that we need to do, and also when I'm doing the tutorial and showing you how to press a few things, he comes in very handy for that as well. All right, there are a few more notions you're going to need for this project, so without further ado, let's go to the cutting table and go through all of the notions and supplies we're going to need for this project. Okay, so now we're going to go through all of the pieces that you need to have cut out for all of the different views that you may or may not be, or you may be doing. Obviously, I'm doing all of the ruffle views for this dress, so you can see how they're all done. I'll be doing everything except for the sleeveless dress view, but I will talk you through that when that part of the instructions comes to be. So these are the pattern pieces that you are going to need. You are going to need piece one. Now this could be 1A, 1B, or 1C, depending on the cup size that you are using. This is 1C because I'm using the GH cup, and I have marked my dart points here, and my dart legs I have clipped into the seam allowance. I've also clipped into the seam allowance for my notches for my sleeve. So you're going to need one of those cut on the fold. You're going to need one of piece 2 cut on the fold. This is the back. I've got it all nice and cut out on the fold. Got my armhole notches marked on there. Next, you are going to have piece 3, which is your neckline bias. I actually you only need one of these. I cut out two because my fabric was laid on top of each other, but you only need one. So this will be an extra one just in case. You only need one of the neckline bias strips. Mark all of your notches and whatnot, and that should be all nice and ready to go. That is piece 3. Piece 4 is your neckline ruffle. So this is going to be optional. You should have 2 of these. And this is piece, oh, no, that is the wrong piece. This is 5. We need piece 4. This is, yes, piece 4. Okay, here's your neckline ruffle. You need 2 of these. These are cut on the bias, and you want to make sure and mark in on the wrong side of the fabric your gathering lines. This becomes really important when we are actually gathering these 2 separate neckline pieces. Well, it'll become one, but gathering them and fixing those onto the actual neckline of the garment. So you will need 2 of these cut on the bias, and again, mark your gathering lines in that are on the pattern. And I've marked those the entire length of both pieces. So that is piece 4. Piece 5 is the sleeve ruffle, and the neckline ruffle is optional. This one is also optional. This is the sleeve ruffle, but again, I'm going to be showing you how to do all of the ruffles. So I've got my sleeve ruffle cut out. This is also cut on the bias. You need 2 of these, 1 for each sleeve, and then you also have your gathering lines marked. These are further spaced further apart than the neckline ruffle and also the skirt ruffle because you're going to be feeding elastic through here for that puff sleeve. And then we've got piece 6, which are 2 of the sleeves. If you're doing the sleeved version, I've got 2 of those. Piece 7 is your armhole bias. So if you are doing the sleeveless version, you will need the armhole bias piece. I will not be doing that, so I don't have that one cut out, but you will need to do that. Piece 8 is the front waistband. And you need 2 of these. And on the front of one of the pieces, I've put a little piece of interfacing and I have marked the buttonhole placement. So this is where I'll be making buttonholes for my drawstring to go through that casing. So that is piece 8, and that is the front waistband. And then piece 9 here, pretty sure I marked all of these discreetly on the wrong side. Yes. Piece 9 is the back waistband. So you're going to need 2 of those as well. And then we are going to need our skirt pieces. So you're going to need of the piece 10. These are the side skirt pieces right here. You need 4 of these. So we've got, 2 for either side of the front and 2 for either side of the back to give this skirt some nice fullness. So you should have 4 of piece 10. And then you will have 2 of piece 11. And this is the center front and the center back skirt piece. And these are cut on the fold. So you'll have 2 of these, each one cut on the fold. And then we have got piece 12. That is our pocket pieces. And you are going to need 4 of these all cut. So 2 sets of mirrored images. So 4 of the pocket pieces cut. And then piece 13 is the optional ruffle, if you'd like the ruffle. And this is the, what do they call this? This is the center front skirt ruffle. So you've got 2 of these cut out on the fold. And again, I have marked in my lines for gathering on both of those. So there's those. And then piece 14, this is also optional if you're doing the skirt ruffle. If you are doing the skirt ruffle, you need this. But you need 2 of these, just 2 of these pieces. Number 14, the side ruffle, and you do need to mark in those gathering lines on that as well. So those are all ready. And then finally, as far as pattern pieces, We are going to need 2 of piece 15. This is the drawstring, so these are going to get sewn together as well. This is the drawstring piece, so we need 2 of the drawstring as well. And then, as far as our notions, I'm going to be using contrast thread so that you can see everything that I'm doing. This is Gutermann Maro 100 in color 189. Anyways, this is a dark teal because I want it to really stand out with my mustard fabric so that you can see what I'm doing. And depending on what options, well, you're going to need a 1/2 inch elastic for the drawstring. This goes around the back part of the drawstring, so you will need a 1/2 inch elastic for that. If you are doing the puff sleeves, you're going to need 1/4 inch elastic. So I've got 1/4 inch elastic for the sleeves. And then if you're doing the optional tassels, which I will also be showing you how to do for that drawstring, you're going to need either 2 or 4 skeins of embroidery floss. I'm going to be doing 4, so I'll do 2 skeins of embroidery floss for each tassel. I just want my tassels nice and thick. I'm also adding the optional bead to go on each one of those tassels. And you will need an embroidery needle, and you're going to want, these are usually, I mean, kind of sharp, but a little bit duller, but they have a nice big eye. This is actually the needle I use to thread my serger thread back through itself when I need to do that with my serger. But you want to make sure that your embroidery needle does go through your bead, because that'll be important when we get to that point. So there you have it. Those are all of the pieces that we need, the prep work we need to do, and any of the optional notions that you may want, depending on if you want to add tassels or not to that drawstring. All right, let's go to the sewing table and start sewing up this dress. All right, so now we are ready to start sewing. So I have piece 1 and piece 2 sitting here. This is my front and my back. And we need to do some stay stitching. Now, keep in mind that the neck edge on the front and the back, just the neck edge, is a 1/4 inch seam allowance because we're going to be putting that that bias neckline finish to finish off this neckline. So I'm going to be sewing from the shoulder seam to center front, and then again from the shoulder seam back to center front at a little bit less than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Because I don't want that to show once I've sewn my bias tape in. So, and I'm also using contrasting thread, so I really don't want it to show. But that's what we should be doing anyway. And then also on my back, I am going to be sewing from the shoulder edge to center back, and then from the shoulder edge to center back. The reason we do this is that we're pushing the bias onto straight of grain. If we try and go all the way around, starting at one shoulder seam, going to the other, there's the potential that you're going to pull this out of grain going from this point, going from center back up to the neckline. So we go from shoulder seams to the center. You'll have to flip your fabric and do it from the wrong side on one side and from the right side on the other in order for that to work. But I am going to just really quickly go to the machine and do that stay stitching, and I will meet you right back here. All right, so I've got my neckline nice and stay stitched there within the 1/4 inch seam allowance, so a scant 1/4 inch on both the front and the back. And I'm going to set my back aside for a minute because we're going to do our bust darts next. All right, so we've got our bust darts. So I have marked my dart points here, and I've marked into my dart legs here on this, my fabric is wrinkled, here onto the side of my shirt to mark where I'm going to be pinning my dart. So I am going to be showing you guys one. So I'm just going to pin, this is the wrong side of my fabric up. I'm just going to pin right sides together my 2 dart leg notches. And pop a pin in. And then I'm going to fold the fabric here, and there's my dart point right there, you see. And I'm going to pop a pin in there. Like so. All right, so now we're going to go to the, so there's the only 2 darts I use, or only 2 pins I use for my darts. So now I'm going to go over to the machine and show you how I sew these darts. All right, so we're going to sew our darts. So I'm going to take a piece of my top thread and pull it real long, just so I can make sure it goes from the dart leg up to the dart point. You kind of see that line there. because I'm going to first drop my presser foot here at the notches here at the base of the dart, and I'm just gonna sew my locking stitch. And then once that is all set, kind of raise that up a little bit, and this long piece of thread that I reached out, I'm gonna pull it taut, and I'm gonna pull it all the way to my dart point, which is right here at my pin. And so I'm going to use that line of stitching as a guide for my dart. So I'm just going to follow along that line of stitching, or that line of thread. Careful not to catch the thread. That makes it kind of hard to pull back out. And once I get to the point and right at the fold of that fabric, I'm going to stop, pivot, and pull that guideline out. Now I'm going to sew back into the dart right along that fold about, I don't know, 1/2 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, and then back stitch or do my locking stitch. So that's happening in the dart bulk. So it looks kind of like this. Okay? It just gives a really nice finish, and then you can cut your long guide thread off. Gives just a really nice long finish there at the end without getting pointy, which can be difficult. All right, let's go to the pressing mat here, and I'll show you how to press your darts. All right, so now we're going to press our darts. Now the instructions say you can press your dart up or down. Traditionally, we press our darts down, which is actually my preference and what I'm going to do here. And if we press it down, our dart bulk is flush with our side seams here. But for large busts, it can also be just kind of create a little bit prettier of a dart if you press the dart bulk up. So it's up to you which way you want to do it. The directions say you can do either way. If you do press the dart bulk up, though, you will notice that your dart bulk it's not flush with the side seam, which is fine. You're just going to, after you've pressed it, just trim that dart bulk so that it is flush with the side seam. Okay? But again, I like to press mine down. That's just my preference. Press it from the back. And then I like to press it from the front. Like so. And now we have a nicely pressed dart that doesn't have a real pointy end there. So we'll do that on both sides, and then I'll meet you back here, and I think we're ready for shoulder seams here next. All right, so now we've got both of our darts sewn. This is right side up. We are now going to sew our bodices together, our front and back bodice together at the shoulder seam, right sides together. So I'm just going to pin this. Like so. And we're going to sew these at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance and then finish them off to your preference. I'm going to be using a serger for mine, but you can use a zigzag, you can use the faux overlock, you can use French seams if you want. However you'd like to finish off your seam allowances, go ahead and do that. So 1/2 of an inch seam allowance at both shoulders, right sides together here. And then finish those off and then press those towards the back of the bodice. And I will meet you back here to talk about the neckline finish. Okay, so we've got our front and our back sewn at the side or at the shoulder seams, and I have serged mine and trimmed some of that seam allowance off, but I did sew those at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. And now it's time to do our bias on our neck edge. So I'm going to set this aside while we prep and get our bias tape ready to go. Okay, so what we are going to do here is we are going to be folding up on the unnotched side. Let me determine my wrong side first. It's my wrong side. Okay. So this is the side that has, this is the end that has the notches that you can see. I barely clipped into those because there's only 1/4 of an inch seam allowance that we're messing around with here. So we have center back and then we have our shoulders. Okay.
So we are going to be folding over on the other side. So this is the unnotched side. And we're going to be folding this over 1/4 of an inch. And very carefully going the entire length of this. All right, once we have that long edge all pressed to the wrong side, we are going to take our points here and we're going to pin these together, right sides together. Like so. And I'm keeping that long edge folded up. So we're going to sew this with this folded up. And I'm going to sew at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance right along that seam there. So let me go do that. And again, this is folded up. This little edge we just pressed is still folded up, and we're going to sew it that way. And I'll be right back as soon as I do that. All right, so I've sewn that seam allowance at the 1/2 of an inch. And now we are going to open this up. So it's mimicking that V that's at the front of the neckline. So now I'm just going to press that seam we just sewed open. And then we are going to trim. I'm going to flip it over to the right side here. We're going to trim it flush to that folded edge. Just like so. Okay. Okay, so once we've done that, our neck binding is all ready to go. So we can now move these things out of the way and pin this to our bodice. So we want our bodice right side out, like so. And we are going to match up those notches. Let me find. Should have a shoulder seam, center back, and another shoulder seam, and I do. So I'm just going to pin center back to center back, and I'm pinning these right sides together. And because bias tape can be kind of slippery, I'm only going to pin it. I'm pinning that shoulder seam. And then the other shoulder seam. And then I'm going to pin my center front point. Like so. So that's the only pins I'm putting in here. And I'm going to leave the rest of it free. And we're going to sew with the bias tape against the feed dogs. So let's go to the machine and sew this bias tape in place. All right, so I'm going to sew with the bias tape or bias strip, the bias facing, whatever you want to call it, against the feed dog. And we are sewing this at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, which should enclose the stay stitching that we did. And I'm starting at the center back. So we're just going to go real slow, making sure that bias tape is, the raw edge of the bias tape is lining up with the raw edge of the neckline. So pulling that back as I go. I want to make sure that that seam allowance stays towards the back. And I'm going to go all the way down to the center point, and then we will pivot. I'll pick up my presser foot, leaving the needle down, and pivot at that V point. Okay, so once we've got this sewn to the right side, I'm going to go through with my little, I think these are 6-inch scissors, my little tailor's points, and I'm really going to clip just through, this is the back neckline, isn't it? From shoulder seam, yes. From shoulder seam to shoulder seam, and you can clip through the stay stitching at this point. The stay stitching has done its job. And I'm clipping about every 3/8 to 1/2 of an inch in that back neck curve, being careful to only clip the neck edge. And I'm clipping to, but not through the actual stitching. We don't need to do this through the front because that's a straight line of stitching, but I do need to come through here and clip center front, to, but not through that stitching line. Okay, our next step is to understitch. So we're going to start at center back again. And I'm going to be doing this with, so this is the right side of the blouse, the right side, or the bodice, the right side of the tape. And my seam allowances are going towards that bias tape. And I am going to be kind of very carefully pulling the seam of the bias tape away from the seam of the bodice, but making sure that that seam allowance is going towards the facing. And we're going to go all the way around the neckline. This is understitching, and it's magical when we go to press this bias piece to the wrong side. It's going to make everything roll so beautifully to the wrong side. And again, I'm sewing really close to that previous stitch line, but on the facing side, making sure that seam allowance is going towards that little bias facing. And when we get down here to the center point, we can't just pivot. We're going to have to cut our thread. So we will get right up there to that point and then stop. And now we can pick up. So we can't get right down to that point. And start it up again. Making sure that seam allowance is going towards. Okay, so now that is all understitched all the way around. So now I'm going to pull the pressing mat back up, and we are going to press this facing to the wrong side, enclosing all of those raw edges. And we're going to press and get that pinned in place, so then we can come back and top stitch it down. All right, so now we're going to take our neckline facing. I've got the wrong side of the bodice up, and we're just going to fold it over to the wrong side. And we want to make sure that a little bit of the right side, little bit of that right side is folding over to the wrong side. Basically, we want to be able to see that seam line on the wrong side. So I'm just going to pop in some pins. It's really helpful to do this over a curved tailor's ham, especially when you're working in the curve of like this back neckline. So I'm just going to do a little bit here at a time. I'm also using glass-headed pins so I can, if I hit them with my iron, I'm not going to melt anything. And then we just want to press as we go here. Okay, once this is all pinned to the wrong side, all nice and neat, we are now going to sew it down. Now, you could sew, technically you should be top stitching it down, which means you should be stitching from the top and going nice and slow. But if you're putting the ruffle on, where that ruffle is going to really be covering a lot of that, you could also stitch with the bias tape up. If it doesn't need to be perfectly uniform all the way around, just makes sure that you actually catch your raw edges and stuff like that. But completely up to you. I will do it per the instructions and do it with the right side up. And I'll just be kind of feeling along the edge to make sure I'm catching my folded edge. And I'll be pulling pins out as I get to them, but from underneath. So let's go to the machine and we're going to top stitch this neckline down. Okay, so we should be top stitching about 1/2 inch away from the edge of the neckline. Again, I've got pins here. I can see when they're coming up, but I'm just gonna go slow. But now I'm top stitching, making sure I'm catching that folded edge as we go all the way around. And yeah, we're just gonna top stitch this entire neckline. And when we get to that center point in the front, we will stop and pivot our needle, leaving that needle down so we have one continuous line of stitching. Let's get this sewn. Okay, so we should have that stitched down both on the front and the back. You're going to want to check, make sure you hit all of your areas, and then maybe give it one more good press from the right side over a ham. And then if you were doing the neckline ruffle, that is what we'll be doing next. Okay, so now we are going to be attaching the neckline ruffle. So we will need our bodice that's been, the bias has been finished on the neckline. It's sewn together at the shoulders, but that's it. We don't have any of the side seams sewn. We will need this, but not right now. Right now we're going to work on the actual ruffle piece. So we should have 2 of the ruffle pieces, and these are piece 4, pattern piece 4. And I've marked my gathering stitch lines on either side of the wrong side. And we're going to be lining these up, short ends together at those notches. So right sides together. Again, these are cut on the bias. And we're going to sew this seam at 1/2 inch. So we're sewing these 2 strips together, basically. So we're going to be sewing this seam together at 1/2 inch, finishing that seam allowance. Keeping in mind, the back side of this ruffle might be seen from the right side. I'm just going to serge mine. I'm fine with that, but you may want to think about that if you want to do a French seam or something, knowing that could be seen on the right side. So I am just going to do a regular seam though, 1/2 inch, serge it, and then you're supposed to press it to one side, but I'm actually not going to do that yet just because I don't want my lines. I will wait and press it after I've done my sewn in my gathering stitching lines. So yeah, let it sew 1/2 inch, finish the seam allowance, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll talk about doing our gathering stitches. All right, so I've got these sewn together. My gathering stitches are off a little bit. I'm not too worried about that. It'll all come out in the wash. So now I'm going to go, we're going to go to the sewing machine and start at one side, and we're going to do a gathering stitch. So like a 5 millimeter length stitch. We're not going to back stitch or anything at either end. We want to leave our tails nice and long. So I'm going to stitch all the way down till we get really close to this seam and stop about 1/8 inch away from this seam. I'm going to sew down to this second line and then go all the way back. And then I'm also going to do that on this one as well. This side as well. So let's go to the machine and sew those gathering stitches before we finish the edges of our ruffle off. All right, so I'm just going to follow my gathering stitch. I've taken my stitch length up to, I'm going to give myself a nice long tail there, taken my stitch length up to a 5 millimeter length. And I've turned off my locking stitches and stuff because I want to leave those, I want to be able to pull these gathering stitches. So we're just going to sew along this first line. When I get about 1/8 of away from that seam, we're going to pivot. So down to the other line. And now sew back. And I want to leave nice long tails so I can do those, pull those for gathering. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side of the ruffle, going the other way, and I will meet you back here in just a second. Okay, so now I have my gathering stitches in, which I can go ahead and press this now, and if my lines disappear, it's fine because I've got thread that's marking those lines. And I've left nice long tails at either end here so we can do our gathering. So the next step, the instructions want you to finish off both edges of this ruffle. Now, I think actually this could be really cool to not finish them off and to leave them as is and to even, get in there and try and get the edge to fray if you wanted kind of a deconstructed look. I think that would be kind of cool. But we'll be finishing these off for the sake of this tutorial. So it also suggests you could do a little narrow hem where you're turning it just 1/8 inch and then again 1/8 inch on either side. That feels very tedious to me, but you could do that. You could also use a rolled hem foot on your machine. A lot of machines come or you can buy a generic rolled hem foot. Takes a little bit of practice to get that working right, but you could also finish that off that way. You could just serge the edges if you wanted to for a decorative finish, or do the rolled edge on your serger, which is what I'm going to do. So I am just going to go and so however you want to finish off the edges of your ruffle, let's go do that now. I'm just going to hit mine up with the rolled edge on my serger, and then I will meet you back here and we'll start, I think, yeah, then we will start pinning things on to the front of our bodice. All right, so my ruffle has been rolled edged on both sides. I've got my gathering stitches in, and on my bodice, on the right side, I've marked a line in disappear ink that will go away from the center front down to the waist edge, because this is going to be important when we're pinning our ruffle in place. Okay. We want to find the center of our ruffle, which is here at this seam line. I need to hit that with steam because that 4 will go away. And we're putting the wrong side of the ruffle to the right side of the top. and we're going to be lining up the these two gathering stitches. We want to center those in between our line of top stitching and the finished edge of our neck. Okay, so I'm just going to roughly find that, and I'm just going to pin right here in the middle. And now we're going to take care of this side of the ruffle, and then we'll do the other side of the ruffle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my long threads here, untangle my thread, got a little tangled, and that's not going to gather. So I'm going to grab these two threads, and I'm just going to pull this. Now I find it better to gather it more than what you think, because I think it's easier to let those gathers out as we are pinning. You can do what you want. Again, we're just messing around with this, I guess it's right side when worn side first. Okay, so when that's roughly, kind of just like roughly look. Okay, that's actually shorter than it needs to be. So that's good, because then we can let it out as we go. Oh, another thing, the shorter area from the gathering stitches needs to be towards the body, and the larger section, longer section away from the neck edge. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we are going to pin this in place, because we're actually going to hand baste this. So what I want to do is I'm going to pin the bottom here of my ruffle to, and I want the two lines of gathering stitches to go right over that center front line that I drew in. So I'm just going to pin that in place. And now I'm going to roughly use pins and I'm going to pin this in place, just this one side, and then I will go back and actually hand baste it in place. Okay, so once we've got that one side, again, the side I've not even messed with, once we've got that side nice in the way we want it, I'm going to thread a contrasting thread, and this is actually silk thread that I took out of my, my mentor actually gave it to me. It's hard to find silk thread anymore, but it works really well for basting. Silk thread's a little strong to be using for actually sewing garments together, including silk fabric, because it's such a strong fiber. It'll saw through the seam. There we go. So I'm just going to hand baste this in place so that when we sew it down with the machine, everything stays put. And this way, since I'm lining things up with this neck edge, we can get that done really well. So I'm just going to start here at center back. And I'm actually going to do a back stitch. Keep that from moving. And now I'm just going to do a running stitch, all making sure that that neck edge, real big stitches though. And I'll take these pins out as I go. Okay, so I've got my ruffle hand basted onto one side of the top. Okay, now we are going to, now that this is basted in place, we are going to gather the other side and get it in place. But we're only going to be basting this one to where to the end of the neck edge here. We're going to leave it free. Just it'll make sense when we start sewing it down. I promise. But let's go ahead and start doing the same thing on this side. So we are going to try not to twist things here. And find our thread tails. And we're going to start gathering. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this. You don't need to watch me do this again. I will come back when it's time to baste the second half of the ruffle in place. All right, so I've got my ruffle all gathered, and just like we did with the other side, I've got this gathering stitches all wrapped around my finger. I'm going to just kind of roughly pin it in place. All along that neck edge. And then when we get here to center front, I am going to pin it, but we won't hand baste it. But I'm basically going to be overlapping here at center front, overlapping those gathering stitches from one layer to the next. Okay, so I've got this pinned from center back all the way down to the waist here. What I'm going to do though, before we hand baste, is I'm actually going to take my gathering stitches here on this top level, because we're going to stop the hand basting, but I don't want this ruffle to grow on me. So I'm just going to take these gathering stitches and I'm going to tie them off so that that doesn't move. Like so. Ooh, we will get to pull these out here in a minute. But again, that ruffle is just, those gathering stitches are just overlapping each other there from center front all the way down the center line there. Okay, so I'm going to go off camera. You don't need to watch me do this again, but I'm going to start at center back and I'm going to hand baste up until I get to the V here on the neckline, and then I'm going to stop. I'm not going to hand baste. I'll leave the pins in here down center front, but I'm not going to hand baste this down because we've got to be able to sew the layers down and all that jazz. So I will stop hand basting here at this center point. So let me do that, and then I'll meet you right back here. All right. So I have hand basted the lower all the way from center, the bottom of center front all the way around. And then we've stopped right here at the end of that V. So this top layer of the ruffle has not, it's still got pins in it, but it's not been hand basted down. So now we are going to actually sew this in place. And we sew a couple of lines of stitching and then we'll pull all of our basting stitching out. So we're getting close to the end, I promise. So let's go to the sewing machine and let's sew this ruffle in. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is this upper ruffle that I did tie my gathering stitches off. I'm going to remove these pins. I just have two here. And I'm going to move this top ruffle out of the way. So I'm just sewing on this bottom ruffle. And I am going to sew right in between these two lines of gathering. I've taken my machine back to a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. And I think, let me make sure my locking stitches are on. Yes, okay. All right, so now we go. So I'm just sewing making sure everything is nice and flat. I don't want to accidentally catch anything. Right in between those lines of gathering. And everything should be lying nice and flat under there because of that hand basting. So we are just sewing all the way around the neck. Okay. When we get back to the point here where we stopped hand basting, I'm actually going to leave my needle down, and I'm kind of putting the bottom ruffle under there. And now I'm going to lay this top ruffle back on top of the bottom ruffle. And I just want to line up those lines. And now we will continue down. Okay, now before we pull all of those basting stitches out, the instructions, I'm actually just going to go around here to the back. Oh, see, look what I did. I accidentally caught some of the fabric. So I'm going to unpick that little section real quick and fix it. Yeah, it's just that little section. I just caught a pinch of the fabric that got folded up under there. So I'm going to unpick that and resew that area, and then we're going to come back and sew another line of stitching to secure it once more. So be right back. Okay, so I fixed that little area. So you just want to make sure that everything's lying nice and flat underneath as well. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing about, we're going to pull this ruffle out of the way and start sewing about 1/8 of an inch towards just inside. So we've got our line of stitching here in the center. We want to sew another line of stitching about 1/8 of an inch to the left of it, I guess when everything's all said and done, towards the neckline. And we're going to sew that starting at this point, going all the way around the neck, and then all the way down to center front, okay? So that's what we're going to do next. All these basting stitches. And then we get to pull out the basting stitches. We're almost there. So I'm just going to pull the top ruffle out of the way here just a little bit. And again, I am sewing a line of stitching just right inside, about 1/8 of an inch away. So kind of in between this gathering stitch and that line of stitching that I just did. And again, we're going to sew all the way around the neckline, trying not to sew on the basting stitch just to make it as easy as possible to pull that out here in a minute. But these are the lines of stitching that are going to stay in. And I'm assuming that you are using a thread that is not contrasting to where that won't stand out like mine will, but all right, now we get to go in and tear out all of these basting stitches. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then I'll meet you back here, and we just have one more step to kind of finish off our bodice before sleeves. All right, so once our basting stitches are all removed, we should have two like close together lines of stitching, sewing that ruffle down all the way around the neck. We've got that finished binding, I guess, on the inside of the neck to finish things off real nicely. And there we have the attached ruffle. So the final thing we're going to do to the blouse, the bodice, is we're going to just baste this down right inside the seam allowance. So I'm just going to go to the machine and sew probably at 3/8 of an inch within that 1/2 of an inch seam allowance and sew this ruffle down to the bodice of the shirt. And then we are ready to tackle sleeves. So let me do that real quick and then I'll come back and we'll talk about sleeves. Okay, so I now have that ruffle basted down to the bodiced front. All right, so if you're doing the sleeves, we are now going to move on to the sleeves. If you are doing the sleeveless view, you are going to want to skip ahead. And I've got everything time-stamped down in the description box, but you're going to want to skip ahead to side seams. That's what you're going to want to do next is side seams if you're doing the sleeveless view. If you're doing the sleeved view, I will meet you back here and we're going to get these sleeves in. Okay, so it's time to now sew the sleeves. So we can take our bodice that we've got the ruffle or not ruffle, depending on what you've chosen to do, and we're just going to set that aside for a minute. So now we're going to be working on creating the sleeve. So I've got one sleeve made up already, and this has got the ruffle, and it's got the elastic that's also in that ruffle, and the basting stitches because the sleeve cap gets gathered into the arm's eye as well. So this is what we're going for with this next sleeve. So what we need is our sleeve ruffle. We want to make sure that our basting lines are marked, our gathering lines. And then we want our sleeve. I've made an X here. This is the wrong side of the sleeve. So this is the right side of the sleeve since my fabric matches. This is the wrong side of the ruffle. So we're going to want these pieces as well as your 1/4 inch elastic, and there is a chart there in the pattern that will tell you how long to cut your 1/4 inch elastic depending on your size. So go ahead and you're going to want to do that as well. So once we've got all of our pieces, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew 2 lines of gathering stitches on our 2 lines of our sleeve ruffle. Keeping in mind, these are spaced further apart than the neck ruffle and also the skirt ruffle because this is gonna, in the end, turn into a casing for the elastic. So go ahead and make just 2 separate lines of gathering. So we're not going to go down to one end and sew up. We actually want 2 separate lines of gathering stitches with nice long thread tails at the end of each. So go ahead and do that to your ruffle piece and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I've got my basting stitches put into my ruffle here. Now I'm going to go and finish however you finished off your neck edge ruffle or how you're going to finish off your skirt. I'm using the rolled hem on my serger, but you could use the rolled hem on your sewing machine, or you could alternatively just fold these long edges 1/8 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch over to the wrong side on both the top and the bottom. Or if you wanted a really cool deconstructed look, you could also just leave them raw. That's kind of cool. Completely up to you. So I'm just going to run over to my serger and without clipping my gathering threads, I'm going to go ahead and do the rolled hem stitch on the top and the bottom of this ruffle. And then I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got my ruffle and I've got my ruffle wrong side up. So this is the wrong side, and I've marked the center of the ruffle here with a pen. And then I've got my sleeve. This is actually the wrong side up right now, but I've marked the center point of the sleeve as well. So I'm going to turn this over. So I've got the wrong side of my sleeve. I just turned it over. So this is the wrong side of the sleeve to the wrong side of the ruffle. And I'm matching up these 2 middle points. And I'm matching up the raw edge of the sleeve just to sit just above that bottom basting line. So the smaller amount of the sleeve or the ruffle is pointing down right now, and the larger amount of the ruffle is pointing up. And the wrong side of my sleeve to the wrong side of my ruffle. And I'm just going to pin those together right there. So now I want to take one side at a time. I'm going to grab my gathering stitches. I'm going to grab those top threads and I'm going to start gathering. Okay. And then once we've gathered enough, we're going to match again the raw edge of the sleeve to that bottom basting line. Kind of mess around with the gathers just a little bit to make those pleasing. Although I will say we are going to put elastic into the channel and that gathers it up even more later. So they aren't quite as, they don't need to be quite as perfect. Okay. And then I'm going to gather up the other side to do the same thing. And again, I like to gather it in too much and then we can release it. So now we'll match up this side. Okay, like so. Okay, now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we are going to sew with a regular stitch length, 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the sleeve, not the ruffle, 1/2 inch from the raw edge of the sleeve. So let's go over to the machine and do that now. Okay, for this step, if it's easier for you to mark in that 1/2 inch seam allowance on the sleeve, you can totally do that. Mark that in with a water-soluble pen or a heat erasable pen. I kind of eyeball it because I know I've measured it in and I know that about this 1/8 of an inch comes out on the other side of my presser foot. So now I'm just going to sew and I'm keeping the raw edge of my sleeve level with that bottom line of gathering. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to go back and we're going to trim this seam allowance on the sleeve down in half, being very careful not to cut the ruffle. Just want to cut that seam allowance of the sleeve. And you want to cut it to about 1/4 of an inch, so basically we're cutting it in half. All right, so we've cut that down to 1/4 of an inch-ish. So now we are going to go on to, well, this is the right side of our sleeve. But we're going to flip the ruffle up. And you can give it kind of a finger press here. But basically, we're going to press this up and I'm pulling. So we have our line of stitching that we just sewed. It can get quite messy with all these gathering stitches. We've got this line of stitching right here that I just sewed. And now we're going to do the second one. So I'm going to follow and I'm going to sew just right inside this second line of top stitching. Okay. And I am pulling the sleeve and the ruffle away from each other. And this is going to capture the seam allowance that we just trimmed in between these layers. You want to try not to sew on the gathering stitching. It just... All right, so on the front, we've got it like so. And then on the back, we have enclosed that seam allowance really nice and neat. So now we're going to pull out those basting stitches, both the top and the bottom basting stitches. And then when I come back, we'll thread our elastic. Okay, so we've got our channel basically. All that gathering stitches have been pulled out. So I'm going to put a safety pin on the end of this 1/4 inch elastic. You can use a bodkin or however you like to thread your elastic. And we've created a channel here on the side, so we can just insert that elastic and start feeding it through. Okay, once I've pulled this, I haven't pulled this all the way through, but once this end of the elastic is flush with my seam allowance, I'm going to go over to the sewing machine. I'm going to press this, like finger press this ruffle up, and I'm just going to baste this all into place at 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so I'm going to go do that real quick, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I've basted the ruffle, the top part of the ruffle up to the sleeve, and now we've got this elastic, and you can kind of peel that back just a little bit and just trim the elastic down, not like really close to your basting line, but you know, a little bit, just to get that elastic a little bit out of that seam allowance. Okay, so now that's nice and secured. So now we can continue, find where I stopped there, continue threading the elastic through the rest of the sleeve. All right, and then once we're through the other side of the sleeve, we can take the safety pin off, and very carefully, we don't want this to suck back in. We are going to do the same thing on this side that we did on the other side. So we're going to make sure that that ruffle is up against the sleeve, and we're just going to baste this in place along the side seam at 3/8 of an inch. So let me do that real quick, and I'll be right back. All right, so now we've got the elastic in. I trimmed that side down a little bit as well. So now we are all good. So the final thing that we need to do on this sleeve before we go to put it in the bodice is I want you to sew two lines of gathering stitches. And I want you to start at 1 notch. And this is a 5mm stitch length, and we want to leave nice long thread tails. But start at 1 notch, go all the way around the sleeve cap until you get to the other notch. Sew down 1. We're making that that kind of open-ended box, and then we're going to go back all the way around, roughly about 1/4 of an inch, and I don't know, 1/2 of an inch. These are all going to come out once we've sewn the sleeve in. So let's do that on both sleeves, and then when we come back, we are going to set these into the bodice. All right, so now that we have our 2 sleeves completed, it is time to put the sleeves into our bodice. So I am going to decide which side this is. Okay, so I've got my bodice here. You need your bodice and your sleeves. And I am laying this out. So this is the front, this is the back, and here is my arm's eye here. One of my arm's eyes. Front, back. So I'm going to take my sleeve and right side down. You want to make sure you've got the correct sleeve. So I'm putting this right side down, and I'm matching this top notch of my sleeve to the shoulder seam. And I'm just going to pop a pin in right there. And now I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to match my double notches. Again, these are right sides together. And my underarm seam. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to match my single notch. I want to try and keep my gathering threads kind of out of the way there because we're going to need those here in a second. And then my underarm seam. Okay, so now we've got quite a bit of ease in between top of sleeve and those notches, which, you know, we need to gather. So we are now going to be pulling our gathering stitches to pull that tight. So I'm going to start over here. And I'm just going to pull the gathering stitches. Sometimes I have to take the pin out that's here at the top. Things get caught up on it, which isn't a big deal. And I like to definitely over gather the sleeve cap. So much easier to do that and then pull it loose as needed. So as you can see now, the sleeve is much smaller than the arm side, which is fine. So now we can go through. And I'm going to start on this side because this is the side where I stitch down. So it's a little bit more stable. And I'm just going to pull those gathers out a little bit so that that matches. And once I get a good gap or a good width there, now we can pop in a couple more pins. Now I'm going to do the same over here. Just kind of release some of those gathers. So that that is matching up really nicely. Okay. And then maybe one more pin. All right. So now we are ready to go to the machine and sew our sleeve in flat. So I'll meet you over there. All right, so I'm going to sew here with my sleeve down. So the bodice is up and the sleeve is down against the feed dogs. And we are sewing, that just helps ease in any extra ease there in that sleeve. But we are sewing at 1/2 inch seam allowance, so let's sew this seam. Okay, so now we're going to take a look and make sure. Don't really have to worry too much about tucks and stuff because of the gathers, but I think we're good. So now what we're going to do is take out our gathering stitches. And I like to just cut here where we stitch down on both the front and the back. So usually, if you can't get it in one pass, it's usually not that many passes. Then I can grab my thread tails down here. Pull that out. And then pull that bobbin out. We stitched over that bottom thread a little. Here we go. All those pieces. Okay. So there we have our sleeve, all nice and stitched into the bodice. So now I am going to go to my serger, because that's how I'm finishing off my seam allowances, and finish off this seam allowance. And I'm going to sew in the other sleeve just the same, and then we'll meet right back here. All right, so now it is time to do side seams, whether we have done a sleeve or we are doing sleeveless. But before we get to that, I do just want to point out when you're doing if you're doing sleeves and you've done the neck ruffle, be very careful not to catch that neck ruffle in that arm's eye seam, both when you're sewing the sleeve to the bodice and also when you're finishing it. But just wanted to point that out. But now it's time to do our side seams. So this is the instruction, whether you are, again, doing sleeveless or doing the sleeved version. So I've got my sleeves that are attached, and I finished off those seam allowances there. Okay, so no matter what you're doing, we are going to want to put our bodices right sides together at the side seam. If you are going sleeveless, you will obviously just be doing the side seam. You won't be going up into the sleeve seam. Make sure that your dart is flush. There's a notch there on the back to match up with the seam of your dart. And then you want to match here at the top, whether you're doing sleeveless or sleeved. And if you're doing the sleeved version, we're now going to continue from the side seam up into the underarm of the sleeve. And you want to match these raw edges, or, not raw, but they're already finished with their hem. Very important that those match. Okay, like so. Now we're going to just sew from the hem all the way up either to the top of the side seam, or if you've got a sleeve, all the way through the hem of the sleeve. And then finish that off with your preference. I'll be doing a serger on mine, and I will show you how I finish off the serged edge here at this finished hem of the sleeve. So sleeveless or sleeved, let's go ahead and sew those side seams, finish them off, and I'll meet you back here. All right, so we've got our bodice all sewn up at the side seams, whether that's stopping at the underarm or going all the way through the sleeve. And I want to show you how I finish off that serged edge if you are using a serger. So at the bottom here at the waist, I can just cut that off flush because that will be fixed with the waistband. But here at the top, because we've already done the hem of that sleeve, I'm just going to take this thread tail and I'm going to wrap it around an embroidery needle and pinch that off so it's a little pearl of a nub there, and then push that through the eye of the needle. That's how I like to thread those wide needles. And then I'm just going to feed this back through that serging about, an inch. Pull that tail through, and then I can cut that thread off. All right, it just looks better from the right side, having that all tucked in, and I can trim my little excess contrasting thread there. Okay, so now we're going to want to go, whether you're doing sleeved or sleeveless, and we want to press these seam allowances towards the back. And I'm using a seam roll in there. A rolled up towel will work as well. The other side. Okay, like so. And now our bodice is all ready to go. We're ready to attach the waistband pieces to it. Now, if you are doing, trying to turn this right side out here for you. Where is it? Here we go. Okay. So if you are doing the sleeveless version, now is the time that you are going to finish off that armhole with the armhole binding. And that is going to be done the same way that we finished off the bias neck edge. that's here on the inside. So if you want to go back and rewatch that section on how we did that, it's the same, except you don't have it doesn't, nothing comes to a V point, but it's the same technique to finish off those armhole bindings. So now is the time that you are going to do that if you are doing the sleeveless version. For the rest of us, I will meet you back here, do that step if you're sleeveless, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll get these waistband pieces in. Okay, so now we're going to do our waistband. So no matter what version you're doing, whether it's sleeveless, sleeved, ruffles, no ruffles, it's time to put our waistbands in. So now we're going to need pieces 8 and piece 9. So on piece 8, we've cut 2, and we have interfaced just the center point here, and I've marked where we're going to put buttonholes. This is so our drawstring can go through there, but just on one piece. So I've just interfaced that little section, marked my buttonholes. And then piece 9, just right here, we don't have anything interfaced. We just have 2 pieces of this. So before we do anything, before we sew any of these pieces together, I'm going to go over to the machine, and I am going to sew buttonholes here into my piece 8. And these buttonholes are going to be... it looks like 5/8 of an inch long. So, yeah, so when you're doing that on your machine, you want to, because you don't have a button that's going through this, it's just a small little drawstring and then elastic that's on the back of that. So I know that I need this to be 5/8 of an inch. Yes, 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go to my machine and sew my buttonholes really quick on this, and then we will come back here and cut them open and go from there. Okay, so I've marked my buttonholes here on the front of my waistband, and I am just going to, I've got my buttonhole foot on here. This is different for each machine, so you're just going to want to know how your machine works here. Normally I would measure my button out here, but I don't have a button that's going into this, so I'm just following the 5/8 of an inch line that I've drawn. And my buttonholes start at the top. Yours may start at the top. They may start at the bottom. And I'm just going to, there we go, sew down until I get to the end of my mark here, and then go back. And my machine records that length. So now I can just go over here and it will give me a buttonhole the same length. So now we're going to go to the back to the pressing table, and I'm going to put fray check on the front and backs of these buttonholes before we cut them open. So let's go do that. Okay, I'm just going to put a little bit of fray check in the center of each of these. Hit them with the iron. And then the back. These just keep, this just really helps to keep the buttonholes from getting all hairy and keeps them more stable a little bit. Okay. And then once we have got that, we are ready to cut them open. I like to use a buttonhole chisel, but it is whatever is your preference. You do want to make sure you've got a cutting mat down though. And I just take this right to the center of those buttonholes. like so. And we've got 2 functioning holes for our drawstring. So now we are set and ready to go finish sewing this waistband onto our bodice. So let's do that next. All right, so I have got this is piece 8. These are both my front waistband pieces, and I have this one marked as piece 8 just so I don't get confused. So these are both the front, right side up, and now I've got 2 back pieces, and I want to put those right sides together with each of their corresponding front pieces. Okay, so now these are both right sides together. We have a waistband and then a waistband facing. The waistband is going to be the one with the buttonholes. Waistband facing will be the one that's on the inside. So now I'm just going to go to the machine and I'm going to sew each of these 4 short ends at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you can finish those off if you want, or you can just leave them as is because they will be fully encased. So I'm just going to go sew those real quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we have our outer waistband piece sewn together and our inner waistband piece, or the waistband facing, sewn together. And I have marked on my waistband facing because I don't have the buttonholes to indicate front and back. And this is a heat erasable pen, so it'll go away with a little heat. But piece 9 is the back piece and piece 8 is the front piece, just to help keep that not confused when I'm sewing. So the first thing I'm going to do, we're going to set the facing aside, and we're going to grab our bodice, and our bodice is right side out. This is the waist piece, and we are going to pin our waistband to the front right sides together, and we want those buttonholes on either side of that center line of the front bodice. We're going to pop a pin, and then we're going to match side seams. And then center back. I don't think I noted center back on the bodice, so let's find that real quick. And then the other side seam. Okay, now we're going to go to the machine, and we're just going to kind of base this in place. I'm going to sew with the regular stitch length, but we're going to sew this at a 1/4 inch all the way around the skirt. And then I'll come back here and we'll work with the facing. Okay, so now we have the outer waistband sewn to the bottom of the shirt. So now we're going to take our inner waistband, and I'm going to go over to the pressing station, and I'm going to press up one of the long edges 3/8 of an inch up all the way around the circumference of this inner waistband. So let me go do that real quick, and then I'll come back and we can sew this to the dress. Okay, so my waistband facing, I have folded under 3/8 of an inch. 8 indicates that's the front. We are now going to match the raw edge, so the edge that's not folded, to the wrong side of our bodice. So we are basically sandwiching the bodice between the 2 waistband pieces. So I'm just matching up my side seam, and then center front. And this is right side of the waistband to the wrong side of the bodice. Center back. Okay, now we can go sew this seam allowance at a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to sew with this side up so I can see where my previous stitch line was. But yeah, it is, this one was a 1/4 inch. We're going to now sew at a 1/2 inch all the way around the waistband of the shirt or the bodice, and then I will meet you back here for the next steps. All right, so at the bottom of our bodice here, we've got both waistband pieces still facing up. We've got our inner waistband piece facing, or inner waistband that's got the seam allowance pressed down, and then our outer waistband that is just got a raw edge up here at the top. So what we're going to do next is we're going to trim this seam allowance down to 1/4 inch, which basically means you can just follow along that original basting line that you sewed when you were putting the outer waistband on. As always, you just want to be sure you are not cutting something you're not meant to be cutting. For me, this fabric is fraying so badly that this is just going to clean this up nicely. It'll get thick here through the front if you've got that ruffle on, because you remember you've got that ruffle sandwiched between the two waistband pieces. Okay, so now we can go to the pressing station and press the outer waistband down, but leave the inner waistband up, because that will keep that out of the way when we attach the skirt in the first pass. So press the outer waistband down, leave that inner waistband up, and I will meet you back here, and we're going to start on our skirts. Okay, time to start working on the skirt. So we have got the front and the back of the skirt are done the same way. So I'm going to show you how to do one of them, and then you're just going to do it again for the, I'll show you how to do the front, and you're just going to do the same thing for the back. It's pretty easy. So we have our piece 11, which was the piece that we cut on the fold. We're going to open that out. This is right side up. And now we're going to take, put those up here. 2 of the piece 10s. You should have a notch here. Yeah, just a single notch. A single notch here on piece 11. So you want to find that corresponding notch on piece 10. And we're going to put those right sides together. Like so. So each piece 11 gets a piece 10 sewn on either side. So I'm going to pop in, match up that notch. And then here at the top. And then I'll do the same on the other side. Pin here at the top. Match my notch. And then here at the bottom. Okay, I am going to sew both of these seams at 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'll sew this seam and this seam at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to finish them off with my serger, however you're going to finish them off, and then I will meet you back here. I'm going to start sewing from the hem and sew up to the waistline. I find that you get less bias shenanigans when you do it that way. So I'll be starting at the hem, sewing up to the waistband on each side, 1/2 inch, and then finishing those off, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've got the 2 side panels sewn to the center panel and finished off with the serger. I'm now going to press these towards the center panel, and then I'm going to do, this will be the skirt front, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the remaining 3 pieces for the skirt back. So get all of those done, and then we'll come back here to put in our pockets. Okay, so we've got our skirt front sewn. I'm now going to be taking 2 of the pocket pieces and we are going to be putting these right sides together, matching the notches of the pocket to the notches here at the side seam and pinning those in place. So the pocket is right sides together with the skirt. Okay, then I'll do the same on the other side. Like so. So now we're going to sew the pocket from one edge to the next at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on both sides. So let me get that sewn and then I will come right back. Okay, once we have our pocket sewn, right sides together with the skirt front, and we've sewn it at the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I'm now going to go to my serger, however you're finishing your seam allowances, and I'm going to finish this entire seam, being careful not to trim anything off. So if you're using a serger, be careful not to trim anything off. But I'm just going to finish this seam. I'm going to go from, actually, I'll probably start at the hem and serge all the way up, keeping this pocket flat against the right sides together, flat against that skirt front. And just finish off both of these seam allowances by themselves here. So I'm going to do that, and then I will come back and we're going to do some understitching. Okay, so I have finished off those seam allowances. Now I'm going to go to the machine and we're going to open the pocket up and we're going to understitch the seam allowance to this pocket piece. So let's go over to the machine and do that real quick, and then we'll do the next step. All right, so this is the right side of my skirt. This is the right side of my pocket. I've pulled the pocket away, and we're going to stitch really close to that fold line, making sure that that seam allowance under there is pointed towards the pocket. And we're just going to stitch that down. Just like that. Okay, I'm going to do this to the other side, and then I will meet you back overhead. Okay, so now we have our skirt front here with our pocket ears coming off of it. This is the front, this is the right side. So I'm going to do these same steps to the back of the skirt, exactly the same. And then when we come back here, we will sew the front of our skirt to the back of our skirt. See you then. Okay, once we have our pockets in, it is time to sew the front of our skirt to the back of our skirt at the side seam. So I've got back of the skirt up. Now I'm putting front of the skirt down on top of it. I'm matching the top. I'm going to put a pin. Then I'm matching the top of the pocket pieces. Pop a pin in there. Then matching my pocket pieces. And all of this is right sides together. And then down here, match my hems. And then the bottom of the pocket. Okay, so now we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to sew this seam 1/2 inch, stop, pivot, sew around the pocket, pivot again, and then sew down the rest of the side seam. So let's go to the machine and sew these side seams. Okay, we're sewing this at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to sew down till we're about at the 1/2 inch, and we're going to stop and pivot and see where we're falling there. And that's right about 1/2 inch. Yep. So now we're going to sew around the pocket. Now that we're at the base of the pocket, we are going to okay. Now I know it seems counterintuitive to go back and finish the seam allowance because we finished the side seams, but we still need to finish the pocket seam. So I'm going to go and hit this with the serger and do exactly what I just did with the stitching line with the serger. So I'll be serging these seams together. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, once you've got your front and your back sewn together at these side seams and have all of that finished off nice and neatly on both sides, you can now press your side seams to the front because we want these pockets going to the front. So we've finished these seam allowances together. We want these seam allowances going to the front. So press both side seams to the front. And then if you are not doing the ruffle at the hem, you can go ahead and skip to attaching bodice to skirt. If you are doing the ruffle at the bottom, which I will be doing, we will tackle that next. So I'll see you there. All right, so now it's time to make our ruffle, and then we will attach it to the bottom of our skirt. So I've got here my 2 center ruffle pieces, which is piece 13, and I've got 2 of those. These are both on the fold, and I've got my gathering lines marked in on both. And then I've got my 2 side pieces, which is piece 14, and I've got 2 of those, and I've got the gathering lines marked on both of those as well. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to make one big tube of all of these pieces, and it's going to go 13, 14, 13, 14 around the tube. So I am going to... My gathering lines are on the wrong side of my fabric. So I'm going to open up one of my piece 13s and sew one of my piece 14s to each side of that 13, kind of matching those gathering stitching lines. So I'm going to sew a 14 onto each side of my first 13. Match my notches. Okay, and I'm going to sew that hem at 1/2 inch and finish it with a serger. And then, and I'm going to do that on both sides of this 13. So I'm going to sew a 14 onto either side of my 13. I'll have a really long strip of fabric. So let me go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back and we'll finish the loop. All right, so I've got my piece 13 with a piece 14 on each side. And there's my gathering stitches on the wrong side. And then there's 13, then there's another piece 14. Okay, now you want to be careful that we don't twist any of our pieces because now we're going to sew the second piece 13 to the 2 ends of, free ends of the piece 14. Right side together. So now I'm going to, again, making sure that nothing, because we're creating a loop, a big loop of fabric, making sure nothing is twisted. We're not creating a Mobius scarf. All right. Now I'm going to sew both of these seams at 1/2 inch seam allowance and then finish them. And then you want to press all 4 of those seams that we've just sewn to one side, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, now that we have this big loop of this ruffle, The next thing we're going to do is we're going to mark a line perpendicular to our gathering marks. You can barely see mine here. It's going to be in the center of the 2-piece 13s, which is right there on the fold line. And then your piece 14s, there was actually a notch there at the side notch. You're going to mark a line perpendicular to those grain lines on the wrong side of the fabric. So there'll be 4, basically in the middle of each of those 4 sections. Okay. But before we sew our gathering stitches, we are now going to finish off the top and bottom of our ruffle. So whether you've been using a rolled hem foot on your machine or folding it under, 1/8 and then an 1/8, you're gonna, or using a rolled hem foot on a serger, which is what I'm doing, you're gonna go ahead and do both ends of your ruffle, both ends. So I'm gonna go ahead and do mine, and then when we come back, we're gonna sew our gathering stitches. All right, so once we've got the top and bottom of our ruffle finished, we are now going to do 4 sets of basting stitches. So we are going to go from the side, the middle of the side where we made that mark, and we're going to sew all the way across the seam line to center front, and then we'll go down and then sew all the way back to the side seam again. Okay, so that'll be 1. And then we will sew from the side seam all the way over to center back, down, and come back to the side seam. And then on the other side, not side seam, the side, center of side, the other side, we'll again start at the side, sew to center back, go down, sew all the way to the side, and then go from the side to center front, down, and all the way back to the side. So 4 sets of basting stitches. So we'll be sewing at a 5mm stitch length with, and leave nice long tails because we're going to need that to pull everything together, because this is a lot of fabric to gather into the hem of that skirt. Okay, I'm going to go sew my basting stitches, or my gathering stitches in real quick, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so here is where the rubber hits the road. We're going to be attaching the ruffle onto the skirt. Okay, we'll go slow here. I've put a pin here to mark center front of my skirt, just so I don't get confused. My skirt is right side out, and my ruffle is wrong side out. Okay. And I'm just going to pick which one is center front and center back. We are going to put this ruffle inside the hem of the skirt so that our ruffle is wrong sides together with our skirt. And I have got, okay, so now we're just going to mark a few different points. So we are going to be lining up the raw edge of the skirt with the bottom line of our gathering stitch, okay? And again, wrong sides together. So the wrong side of the skirt is against the wrong side of the ruffle, and the smallest part of the ruffle is going down. So I'm going to pop a pin, and I am going to match up the center front of the skirt with the center front of this ruffle. And then I'm going to rotate here. And the center, this should match up with your gathering. The center of the side panel, I'm going to match that up with my side seam. And again, I'm matching the raw edge of the skirt with the bottom gathering stitch line. I'm just putting pins in here for right now. We will use some safety pins because there's just a lot of weight with this ruffle. And then I'm going to come here to center back. And match it to the center back of that ruffle. And when I cut out my center back and center front panel pieces, because they got cut on the fold, I did notch that, which is why I know where center back of those are. And then we'll go to the other center point here and match that to the other side seam. That is a nest of thread I've got going on there. Whee! Okay. All right, so now that I have done that, pin that in place. Okay, so now I'm going to be pinning and gathering in between the sections. So obviously I've got way more ruffle than I do skirt hem, but that's okay. And my gore seams here in the skirt are going to match up with the seams there of my ruffle. So that makes that easy. And I'm just going to go section by section, okay? So I'm going from the side seam basically to center back, and I am going to grab my thread tails, probably here from the back. Ooh, I have got a mess back here. Okay. And I'm going to start pulling that to gather it. And I'm just concerned, I'm doing this in the 4 different sections. Remember, we gathered in 4 sections. So we're just going to divide this up section by section. Now I'm going to be more inclined to think that to put pins in here at the hem, but then use safety pins up higher just to keep the weight, you know, because the bulk of the ruffle is up inside the skirt right now. But just to keep that weight supported so that it, you know, things that you're not meaning to get sewn to things doesn't get sewn to things. That pin just popped out, but that's okay. We'll put it back in. And when in doubt, you know, overgather, and then you can go through and smooth those gathers out. Okay, that looks nice and tidy here. Pop that pin back in. Okay, so I am going to, oh my gosh, look at that. I like perfectly gathered that. Well, that very rarely happens. And I'm just going to pop some pins in here. Normally I put pins in perpendicular, but I'm putting them in parallel because I really want to try and support as much of the weight of this ruffle as possible. And we'll go in between these two. Can ease those pleats out just, or gathers out just a wee bit. Not a ton, but just a little. Pop some pins in there. All right. Okay, so I've got this whole section, this little section done. So in between that one little gathering section. So now I'm going to just kind of smooth that ruffle out up inside the skirt. And I'm just gonna, it's like quilters, like when they pin baste, just to keep things supported. That way this can stay in here until everything is kind of finished. But I do want to be careful that I'm not pinning anything I don't mean to pin. I just really want to support that ruffle up in there. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing this all the way around in all 4 sections of my skirt, all the way around, and then I'll come back here for us to sew it down. Okay, now that I finally have all of this pinned in, I put my pins in the wrong way. That's going to be really annoying as we sew. I do that every time. Anyway. Okay, so I've got things like safety pinned up here just to kind of try and keep that ruffle out of the way. I only want to make sure that I'm sewing on 1 layer at a time. And we're going to be sewing the regular stitch length 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge of the skirt. And again, your ruffle should be wrong side up right here, and the dress should be right side down. So we're just going to go very slowly all the way around the skirt and sew our skirt to our ruffle. So I will meet you on the other side. And again, lining up the raw edge of the skirt with the bottom edge of that gathering line. So adjust as you need to. All right, once you've gone all the way around, you're going to want to make sure, check on your ruffle side just to make sure you didn't catch anything like, the bottom of the hem up into the ruffle. And then you can go ahead and take out all of your safety pins. And then finally, I want you to trim this raw edge here just on the skirt, not on the ruffle. Trim that down to half of its width, so like to 1/8 of an inch. So let's do those things, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, so I have taken out my safety pins, and I've trimmed that skirt portion down to like 1/8-ish of an inch. That's really hard because it's only 1/4 of an inch to start with to trim that down and not cut the ruffle, but I managed to do it. All right, so now we're going to take our ruffle out from underneath the skirt, and we're going to turn it to the right side of the skirt. Case in point, that is just a real nest of threads. That's okay, though. Those basting stitches will come out. Okay, so now we are just going to kind of finger press things up, and we're going to go around the skirt, and we're going to sew above, like 1/4 of an inch above our line of stitching. So don't, basically kind of right there where the your other gathering stitches, and I'll probably go just right above my top gathering stitch there. And I'm just going to be pulling the skirt away from the ruffle as I go. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that, and then we get to pull out our gathering stitches. So let's sew this ruffle down, and that will encase this little seam allowance that we trimmed down. Okay? So let's go do that. If you did the sleeve, this is like the same thing that we did with the sleeve, the ruffle on the sleeve. All right. So again, I'm making sure that there's nothing underneath there. I don't want to get caught. And I am just going to sew right to the left of that top basting stitch. Try and not hit the tripod. And this is a regular stitch length. So I'm just going all the way around the hem. Making sure that the ruffle is to the left or the right of me, and the skirt is to the left, and I'm just kind of pulling that seam apart. So let's go all the way around. Okay, let's go above and take a look at what we've done. All right, so our ruffle is on the right side of the skirt, and then here on the back, we've enclosed that seam allowance really nicely. Yeah, so we are finished with our skirt bottom. We can now remove all of our basting stitches, and now we are ready to attach our skirt to our bodice. So remove your basting stitches, and then I'll meet you back here so we can attach our skirts to our bodices. All right, so no matter which skirt option you did, it is time to attach our bodice to our skirt. So I've got my skirt inside out and my bodice right side out. And I'm going to put my bodice inside my skirt. And I'm going to pin the waistband, not the waistband facing. The waistband facing, I still have pressed, or not pressed, but still is up towards the bodice of the shirt. We want that out of the way. So I'm just going to pin, oh God, my skirt this way. It's all oriented here. All right, so I'm just pinning the outer waistband to the skirt all the way around the waist seam here. So matching center front, and then matching side seam, and then center back, and the other side seam. Okay, and I'm going to sew this seam at 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, and then I will meet you back here, and we're going to do some trimming and then pressing. Okay, now that we have sewn that waist seam, we want to trim it down to 1/2 of its width all the way around. Be careful, you're only trimming that seam allowance. You don't want to trim anything extra. All right, so now we can pull our bodice out of our skirt. So everything is inside out at the moment. It's a lot of fabric with all these ruffles. Okay, so now I'm going to go and I'm going to press this seam allowance towards the waistband, so up away from the skirt. And then we are going to fold this little piece down, the inside waistband down, and give it a good press and pin it in place all the way around the waistband. And then we'll come back here and I'll tell you about the 2 different options you have for finishing off that waistband. So this seam allowance gets pressed up, and then we're going to press this waistband facing down to cover that stitching line. And I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've got my waistband, the inside of my waistband, all pinned down and pressed really nicely. So there's a couple of ways that you can finish this off. You can either, oh God, this fabric is fraying like crazy. You can either finish it off with an invisible slip stitch if you'd like, or you can turn it over to the right side and stitch in the ditch to try and catch this little area. And what that means is from the right hand side, I will sew along this entire waistband right there in the crease. I mean, my stitches will show because I'm using a contrasting thread, but if you're using a matching thread with the idea that your stitches would not show. I'm going to go ahead and do it this way just because it's a little bit quicker. And yeah, so I'm going to stitch in the ditch real quick, and then I will come back, and we're getting close to being done, folks. Okay, so there we go. You can see my stitching in the ditch, obviously, because I use contrast thread. I'm okay with it. This dress has tons of contrast thread, so you guys can see, so we're fine. But again, you could have also slip stitched that, and I got a straight thread. Anyway, we are basically finished with our dress. The only thing we have left to do now is construct our drawstring and then the optional tassels. So we will be doing that next. I will see you back here to do some drawstrings. Okay, so we're almost finished, folks. We are now going to make the drawstrings for the dress. You will need both drawstring pieces, and these are piece 15, and you should have cut 2. We make 2 separate drawstring pieces that get attached to a piece of elastic. Also in the instructions, it will tell you the length of elastic you need to cut of your 1/2 inch wide elastic. I'm cutting 20 inches for my waist. So these are the pieces we need for this step. So the first thing we're going to do on both of our drawstring pieces is we're going to fold them right sides together, and at 1/4 inch, so not our 1/2 inch, at 1/4 inch, we're going to sew along one short side and then down the entire length of the long side, leaving one short side open. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. And we're going to do that with both pieces separately. We need 2. We're not sewing these together. They get done separately. So I'm going to do that real quick, and I'll come back and we will turn them. All right, so I've got both strips sewn at 1/4 inch, and I am going to, I've got, this fabric is pretty open weave, and I've got a lot, it's frayed really horribly, so I don't want to trim my stuff too much, but I'm just going to kind of trim that corner down on each side. Okay, now we need to turn these right side out. And I've got open weave fabric, so I want to be very careful about that. But you can use a loop turner if you've got one. I like to just use a pencil. And I checked, and my pencil will go through this width of drawstring. So I'm just going to take my pencil and kind of the eraser end. And I just like this bluntness because it doesn't poke through. I use a chopstick or a knitting needle for a lot, but it will poke through the end if I'm not careful. Okay, and now I'm just kind of separating my layers and kind of starting to tuck that sewn end in just a little bit just to get it started. This can be fiddly. And there we have a turned drawstring. Again, you can use loop turners, might be a little bit easier, although this fabric is also linen and it just doesn't want to turn very easily anyway. Now you can give it a good press to press it flat, and do the same to the second one, and then we'll come back here and start attaching it to our elastic. All right, so we have our 2 finished drawstrings here, and now we're going to attach just one to one end of our elastic, because then we'll thread it through and then attach the other one. So let's go to the machine, and we are going to sew these 2 together on one side. Okay, so I'm literally just overlapping the raw edge of the one short end of my drawstring over the elastic, and I'm overlapping them about 1/2 inch. And I've put my machine on a zigzag stitch. I'm using a 2.5 width and 2.5 length. And I am just going to try and do the left swing of my needle off the drawstring with the right swing on. So it kind of finishes off that raw edge. And I am just going to go back and forth. I'm hitting the reverse button. And then we're so there we've got one end, and I'm going to go ahead and sew it just a little bit further down so that these 2 are kept flush just a little bit more, and to make that a little bit more secure. And this is going to be inside the dress, inside that casing. All right. So this is what we're looking like. Okay, let's go grab the dress and a safety pin. That's my preference for threading elastic. And we're going to thread this through. All right, so we've got one-sided. So we've got the drawstring on one end of our elastic. The other end of the elastic is just raw for right now. So I'm going to put my safety pin in. But, you know, if you like to use a bodkin, however you like to thread your elastic. And we are just going to enter into the casing of our dress here. It's always most difficult getting these started. Okay. And now I think we're good. So I'm just going to take this all the way around to the other side. Okay, once we have made it all the way around, chances are it's going to be like teeny tiny waist because we need to kind of distribute things a little bit better. And the idea is to suck this side, that drawstring, into the dress. So you may need to just do some finagling, push those gathers around, which we can kind of fix all of this here in a little bit. But what's most important is number one, we want to make sure that our elastic is not twisted. That is a big one. And I think we're good all the way through. But now we are going to sew the other drawstring to this other side of the elastic. Then we can pull the waistband nice and stretched it out so that the drawstrings on both sides get sucked in. So let's go to the machine real quick, and we are going to do the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to go and I'm going to sew the other one just like I sewed this one to this side. So let me go do that. I'll be right back. All right, so I've got it sewn, to both sides. Now I'm just going to stretch out this waistband and get both of those sides sucked in. There we go. To the casing, which can be difficult to do because, darn it, the elastic is stretching, which we want it to do, but okay. So once you have messed around here, and I'm sure the first time I put this dress on, it will really suck those in there. But you've got your drawstrings finished. So now we got a couple of things. If you did not do the ruffle on the bottom of your dress, now is the time to hem your dress. And you're going to want to do just a 1/4 inch and then a 1/4 inch turn, so a little narrow hem at the bottom. Again, if you didn't put the ruffle on. And then we've got a couple of ways that you can do your drawstrings. You could just knot them off at the end. You could put aglets, which are the little things that you pinch and then push up. You could do aglets on those if you would like. Did I say knot? You could just knot the ends of these if you want. Or I'm going to show you in the next little section how to add a tassel, which the dresses in the all the dresses that were made for the pattern art all have the tassels. So I'll be showing you how to finish that off next. Otherwise, we're pretty close to being done. All right, I'll see you back here in a minute. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do tassels on the end of your drawstrings. So I've got one done on this side, and we'll be adding it to the other side. So what you're going to need is 1 or 2 per tassel, 1 or 2 skeins of embroidery floss. I'm using 2 per tassel because I think it just gives it a really, oh, I've got a little, I have to give that one a haircut. It gives it just a little bit fuller tassel, and I really like that. And then an optional bead. I'm going to put a bead on mine. You do need to make sure that the opening of your bead does allow your embroidery needle to pass through it. And mine does. And then you need the end of your drawstring. And you can, I mean, obviously you can use this technique on any end of drawstring. Now, if you have a tassel maker, which I actually do, but we're going along with the instructions here. If you do have a tassel maker, that makes this process even easier. But if you don't, this is a great way to do a tassel on the end of any drawstring. Okay. We've got 2 skeins. We're just going to slip off the plastic here, and we want to keep this in a skein, but I'm just going to kind of open up that, okay, and be careful not to unravel anything. And then I'm going to do the same to my second one. And you can, you know, if you're doing 2, you could also do 2 different colors if you wanted. Give something kind of fun. Okay, before I lay this on top, I do need to take a little bit of this, and I want about, I mean, at least like 20 inches length of I'm gonna go a little longer of thread, and I'm gonna cut it at the end of this skein. So I'm just cutting a long piece. We're gonna set that aside. Then I'm going to set these 2 skeins on top of one another, like so. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is determine the middle, which is going to be about, oh, right there. And we're going to take the long piece of string that we cut, and we're going to tie that equally. We want equal legs here on this tie. We're just going to tie this in a knot right in the center of that bundle. So we'll do 1 and then knot it like so. Okay. Now we are going to take our little skein bundle and we're going to fold it in half with those 2 tie pieces up above. And if you need to scooch you want those about even. And they are all wound up on each other, but on themselves, and that's okay. Okay, get that tie right at the top. All right, so we've got about even amount there. Now we're going to take one of the legs, so just pick one, and we are going to wrap it about 1/2 inch below so about that much. We're going to wrap it tightly a few times. And then when you feel like you've got a real tight wrap, we can thread it. When I'm threading my embroidery floss, I like to wrap it, easier said than done, around the needle and kind of pinch off that little bitty bit and then slide the eye over like that. Okay, so once we've got that, we're going to take our needle, oops, well, poop. Hold on, let me wrap that again. Take our needle and we're going to go down through that wrap. And then bring it up, and we're going to knot it with that other piece of the tie. So we're knotting our ends together basically. Now, we're going to take that shorter piece. So this is the one that we use to wrap. I'm going to thread the needle again. And then I'm just going to take this and bury it right through the center of that tassel. And then pull that off, okay? It's going to be super long, but we'll trim all of the bottom off here soon, so don't worry about that. All right, so you can see where we've got a tassel forming. All right, now we are going to thread our needle again with the other side. And here's where we can add the optional bead or beads, however fancy you want to go. Go ahead and I'm going to thread my bead on. So now we've got this little concoction. Now we're going to find the end of our drawstring. Now this is where we want to be very careful because it took me a couple tries to get this one. We want to try and get this the bead as tight to the tassel as possible, but we're going to actually sew this now to the bottom of our drawstring. So we just want to make sure all of that is nice and tight. All right, so I am going to go, I've gone up through the drawstring. Now I'm going to go wrapping this end, and I'm going to go back into the tassel, and I'm going to go out underneath where I've got this line. This is where I tied off those two. And again, we just want to make sure that that's all really tight together. Okay, so now I've gone under that wrap. So now I'm going to go back up through the bead here and up next to kind of where I was. Now I'll go back down through that bead and up under that wrap. And I'm going to do this one more time. So I'm going to go up through the bead. And back down the bead. And under that wrap. Okay. Now this time, pull my tail through. I'm going to go up through the bead. But I'm not going to sew anything to the drawstring. Instead, I'm going to wrap. And this you kind of got to just play with. Okay, when you're happy with the amount of wrapping, you somehow get your needle. Rethread it again. All right, now we're going to go down through the wrap. And you should have a loop, that loop right there. I'm going to take very carefully, take my needle through that loop. And that's going to tie that off. And then we're going to go back down through the bead, through the center of the tassel to bury that tail. Oh, poop. And if it unthreads, do it again. And there we go. We have got a sewn tassel. So now the last step is to give it a haircut. So we're literally just going to cut. I'm actually going to make these somewhat similar. And there we go. 2 tassels. Let me know in the question if you have any questions down below. And there we have our finished loring. All the bells and whistles. Again, you can omit the sleeves. You can omit the neck ruffle. You can omit the bottom tiered skirt, ruffle on the skirt, or you can add any of those elements that you want for a really easy and comfortable summer dress. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this sew along, and if you have any questions, please leave them down below, and I am happy to answer those. Happy sewing!
And there we have it, our finished Cashmerette Loring, this month's club pattern of the month. A really fun summer dress to sew with my partner here. A really fun summer dress to sew. And again, the options are just so much fun on how many or how few ruffles you would like to add to your own dress to again make the cottagecore dress of your dreams. I hope that you have found this sew along helpful. As always, leave me any questions you have down in the comments below, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And check back to the channel later for a full pattern review of my version and my feelings on my version and how I'm styling it and all that kind of stuff coming up on the channel soon. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and happy sewing.